take your seats. Where's Ruth? Oh, Ruth's all the way back there. She has a question. She asked if she could be the first. So we're going to let Ruth give a first question.
How do you suggest we deal with a potentially nuclear-powered Iran?
Well, I think that a core question here has to do with whether or not we should view Iran as a rational actor. And if the regime is truly irrational, that is to say, if it is hell-bent on, let's just say, the destruction of Israel through the use of nuclear weapons, if that is in fact what they intend to do, then we probably have little choice but to use force in order to prevent them from acquiring and using a nuclear weapon. I myself would be inclined to think that they are rational. I myself am inclined to discount the loony rhetoric of Ahmadinejad. I take seriously the argument made by people who know more about Iranian politics than I do. An argument that says that Ahmadinejad really doesn't call the shots, especially in foreign policy issues. And I would work, unless I saw evidence to the contrary, I would work on the assumption that the people in charge are rational and therefore are deterrable. And that in that sense, the strategy of deterrence that was employed during the Cold War, vis-a-vis the Soviets, vis-a-vis the Chinese, probably could work against the Iranians. And I'm willing to take that risk in part because my bet is that the days of the Islamic Republic are actually numbered. That the Islamic Revolution has failed. It's not going to spread across the region. It doesn't seem to have made good on the basic demands of the Iranian people, particularly those who are educated and those who are young. So my guess is that there's a clock ticking. And the clock is counting down the days that the Islamic Republic is going to survive. And I would not want to do anything that would prevent that clock from ticking down to zero. Now, I don't think when the clock gets to zero that an America-loving liberal democracy is going to spring up in Iran. I don't think that for a second. And were I an Iranian, I think I'd be pretty darn suspicious of the United States of America. But I suspect that whatever follows the current political system will represent an improvement and something we can live with.
Give this question right over here, back there, and we'll come this way and then go over here.
My name is Evan. I'm an economics major. Doesn't really matter. My question, you cited your prescription, the engagement, the containment, and the international police force, but it seems sort of like a prescription for September 12th, 2001, and I'm just curious what you would do now.
No, that's what I would do now.
Now?
Yeah.
So you just, so pull out of Afghanistan, pull out.
Oh, no, yeah, no, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Yeah, there clearly would be a fairly difficult effort to extricate ourselves from the exposed positions that we've gotten ourselves into. But I don't think I'd allow the difficulty to dissuade me from making the effort. Now, you can make an argument, well, politically it's impossible. And that could well be a legitimate argument. That clearly if Obama had said in December, I've decided this war is a misbegotten enterprise and we're going to leave, he would have been fiercely attacked for being weak on national security. And I think, pretty sensitive to the extent to which domestic politics constrains policymakers unless they happen to have one hell of a lot of moral courage. So it would be very difficult to do, that's true. But, we spent somewhere on the order of $1 trillion in Iraq. I guess we're up to 1,000 Americans dead in Afghanistan. I think we're spending something on the order of $150 billion a year now in Afghanistan. Those are not trivial considerations. American lives being lost, American national debt going through the roof. So it may be difficult, but I would argue it probably ought to be done.
Down here. Don't we have at least one remaining important national interest in Afghanistan, and that's preventing the reemergence of a state that sponsors jihadist terrorism?
Well, my problem is that, again, were it the case that this was, jihad central, if you could tell me that preventing the Taliban from returning to power in Afghanistan held the key to preventing any further jihadist attacks, then I'd probably say, well, by God, it may be hard, it may be costly, but we need to do it. I see no evidence, none, zero, zip, that Afghanistan somehow is this crucial or exclusive sort of place from which to launch terrorist attacks. There are other ungoverned spaces on the planet Earth, and quite frankly, there are governed spaces from which terrorists have plotted their attacks. London being one example, Hamburg, Germany being an example, Brooklyn, New York being an example. So it just seems to me that to sort of single out Afghanistan, well, that's where the 9/11 plot was hatched, which is true. Sort of misses the point that that's not the only place on earth from which to hatch plots.
You don't think, though, that the fact that they had state sponsors in Afghanistan in any way facilitated, or, well, let me, more than just in any way facilitated, that it wasn't crucial in allowing them to develop a plan that was as devastating as the 9/11 attack was?
I would say, no, not crucial. I doubt seriously that it's crucial. Now, that said, do we have an interest in ensuring that regimes know that giving support to terrorists will cause them to pay a very heavy price? You betcha. And that's why it made sense to take down the Taliban back in 2001. It made absolute sense. We needed, because we said, cough up bin Laden. They said no. It was absolutely imperative at that point for us to make manifestly clear the consequences that would ensue to any regime that behaved that way. It doesn't follow that having taken down the Taliban that we need to stay there for 10 years. That would be where I would part company with Operation Enduring Freedom.
Vasilis, I'm sure there are other people sharing your views. And my question is, are the policy makers seeking advice from groups like yours that has a diverging point of view? This is one part of my question. And the second question is, if at any point we depart, let's say, from Iraq, which seems more likely, what is your prediction will happen there? Would be chaos, would be some kind of pseudo-democracy, if you can project?
I mean, I can make a prediction because I don't know any more than anybody else knows. I mean, truly, it's, you know,
But
it's just guessing. I mean, my guess is that we will end up with persistent violence at a level that if it were occurring here in the United States, we would find utterly unacceptable, but because it's going to be occurring in Iraq, we'll say, it's Iraqis. And we'll end up with something that will, even if it has some trappings of democratic liberal government, will end up being closer to what we understand to be an autocracy, a dictatorship. And there's a host of unknowns. I mean, the willingness of the Kurds to support this order seems to be quite contingent on Kurdish leaders believing that maintaining the order actually serves their interests. And they're not coming at, they're not looking at things through the lens of an Iraqi national identity. And I don't know how long they're going to believe that their interests are being satisfied by maintaining their presence in this order. So the notion that it's going to be a democracy that's going to inspire others to democratic change elsewhere, I think, is the part that, that's the expectation that served to justify the war in the first place, that I would argue is not going to happen. Now, on the first question, nobody asked me in Washington.
Quick question to follow up on the question that Barry asked you about.
Would you identify yourself, please?
My name is Bob Gittens. I'm Vice President of Public Affairs here at Northeastern. But Barry asked you a question about General Petraeus and what he might say he's trying to accomplish in Afghanistan. And I'm wondering whether he might say that he agrees with you that the idea of the long war and that strategy failed, and we've abandoned that. The political problem we have, though, is we've seen a resurgence of the Taliban in Afghanistan, and we worry that that makes Pakistan vulnerable. And Pakistan being a nuclear country, that there is a risk in terms of us not preventing a domino effect again of a fall there that would put nuclear weapons into hands that we're very worried about, which would make Afghanistan, or AFPAC, the locus of...
Well, I think there's no question that Pakistan is the far bigger part of the problem, and that our interests in Pakistan probably do begin to get to the level of justifying the term vital, and primarily for the reasons you said. Their possession of nuclear weapons, weak state, underdevelopment, highly politicized military, this very fragile relationship with India, and the possibility that, whether over Kashmir or something else, that we could find that whole situation spinning out of control. That said, we've been in Afghanistan now for over 8 years. Over the course of 8 years, has Pakistan become more stable or less stable? Less stable. Well, is there any correlation between the U.S. military presence in Afghanistan and the course of events in Pakistan? I mean, I don't know that I can stand here and prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is, But I think there probably is, and I think, I mean, this gets to, you know, one of the core questions, I think, of the narrowness of the debate with regard to national security issues as it occurs in Washington, D.C. And the underlying consensus that tends to discipline that debate. And one part, I think, of that consensus, one aspect of that consensus, is an absolute conviction that the global presence of American troops, that the projection of American power in these far-off places serves a useful purpose, that it makes things better. Now, I look at the course and trajectory of U.S. policy in the greater Middle East since President Carter articulated the Carter Doctrine in 1980, when he said, you're saying it's specific with regard to the Persian Gulf, but I think it has ended up applying more broadly to the greater Middle East, that the Persian Gulf is a vital national security interest of the United States, and we'll do whatever we need to do to make sure nobody else controls it. And that this statement then became the basis for this ever-growing presence, military presence in the region. So it's been going on now for 30 years. And you look back 30 years of this ever-growing, ever-larger effort, and you say, well, are things getting better? Are things getting more stable? And I think the answer is pretty clearly no. But in Washington, D.C., in order to be taken seriously, I mean, you are way out of school if you would dare to question the assumed efficacy of employing American military power in this way. And therefore, to my mind, we just sort of keep perpetuating the problem. It's very puzzling to me, but I think the answer is that there is this consensus. It's fairly deeply rooted.
If I had the time, I have about a dozen questions I'd like to ask you.
Please identify yourself.
I live in Boston. But the question I'd like to ask you is, you indicated that the surge in Iraq wasn't really that instrumental in turning things around.
It's not quite what I said, but...
Well, to some extent, you sort of downplayed the effectiveness of the surge, and I'd like to know what really you think turned things around in Iraq so that we have such a much better situation now than we did about 4 or 5 years ago.
Well, again, I would, I'm not trying to quibble with you. Things are better than they were 4 or 5 years ago, but things ain't good. All right? Things ain't good. We still have bombs that are going off every couple of days and killing people. There still is an insurgency, right? Not as many bombs, not as many people getting killed as was the case in 2006, but I sort of push back at the notion that somehow the surge fixed things. Just my view. But to the extent that the surge produced a positive benefit, and it did, to what should we attribute that? A variety of factors. One of them was the changed method of employing U.S. forces introduced by General Petraeus. The second one was the increased number of U.S. forces sent to Iraq by President Bush. A third, and I would suspect far more important, was the so-called Sunni awakening. And the Sunni awakening, as you probably know, which actually preceded the surge, reflected an effort on the part of U.S. officers to buy Sunni warlords in order to get them to put down their arms and to abandon participation in the insurgency. And this effort, which I think in the old days we would have called appeasement, worked. It worked as far as getting these insurgents to stop insurging. And I suspect that was probably the most important thing.
Yeah.
And not necessarily a permanent outcome.
I'd like to move over to Afghanistan. Iraq at least has some literacy, has a civil service that knows how to make the buses run a little bit, and probably is going to be autocratic, but at least there'll be some semblance of order. Afghanistan has no resources, has no literacy, has no government, has no structure, and it's easy to say, let's get out of there. How do we do that? And we just walk away?
Well, I mean, I don't think I can spell out a detailed operations plan here for you. I would call my commander, were I the commander-in-chief,
I just gave you that role.
and I would say, your mission has changed. Your mission is to extricate the force in good order. Please come see me in 2 weeks and give me a briefing that will tell me how you intend to do that. And I would put the responsibility on military commanders to develop a military plan. And frankly, I think it probably could be done over the course of about a year or so. Now, I would be willing to entertain from my commander a proposal to consider some residual force that was engaged in training Afghan security forces, as long as my commander could provide me with compelling evidence that that investment was actually doing some good. It persuaded me it was not just money down a rat hole. Because as we extricate ourselves, if we are able to leave behind some semblance of a viable security force, then there'd be at least incrementally greater likelihood that the place would remain stable. How much money would I be willing to spend? How long would I be willing to persist in that effort? That would be the subject of a tremendous amount of discussion back and forth, I think. But that's what I heard.
David McKernan, who preceded the current commander, told me that he didn't believe that there was enough resources of people with literacy enough to take over that responsibility without going through it 10 or 15
Well, then if McKiernan had been my commander and have said that, then I would have said, well, thank you, Dave, then we're not going to spend any money training security forces as we withdraw because you have not persuaded me that that would not be a useful effort.
That's why he's not there anymore. He said that.
No, I don't think so.
That's right.
I suspect the reason he's not there anymore is that he didn't drink the counterinsurgency Kool-Aid. And that as General Petraeus became the commander of Central Command, he brought to that position a conviction that counterinsurgency was going to work in Afghanistan, and found that he had a subordinate commander who was not like-minded. And so probably told Gates that this guy wasn't working out, and my friend Stan is the man. That would be my guess the way that thing played out.
And my name is Roger Berman. I'm not an economics major. And I had a couple questions for you. You had said before, difficult effort to extricate ourselves from our exposed position. And then you just said one of the goals would be to try to leave behind something that's viable. So
No, but I tried to phrase that carefully. What I tried to say is, to the extent that my commander could persuade me that an effort to create security forces could produce a positive outcome, then I could be talked into doing that.
So, understood, not disagreeing. So if I stipulate to the fact set that you've laid out of how we got there and the different twists and turns, where I am today looking at the future, My concern is, how do you morally get out of Afghanistan knowing that those you have worked with will probably be wiped out by the Taliban when they come back in for their prior cooperation? As the prior speaker noted,